Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the College of Charleston. My name is Andrew Hsu. I'm the president of the College of Charleston. I'm so happy to see you all here. Thank you. Today's event is part of our bipartisan Bully Pulpit Series, where we provide our community with a platform to hear presidential candidates, and because of this series, we have had so many candidates coming through here. It has become a stop for to the White House. So the reason we have this is not just to only provide with the community a platform for political discourse, but it's also to provide an experiential learning opportunity for our students. This is why we can claim that we provide some of the best liberal arts educations in the world. And so I'm really grateful to our staff who made this series possible. I want to thank Professor McSwain for her directorship for this program, and I also want to thank our coordinator, Cassandra Foster, for her hard work. Without their hard work, we wouldn't have these type of programs for all of you. Finally, I'm sure you're not here to listen to me rambling on, so I'd better hand this mic off to someone else. First of all, on behalf of the College of Charleston community, I want to extend a warm welcome to Secretary Castro to our campus and to our friendly city of Charleston. And here to introduce both Secretary Castro and the State Senator Marlon Kimpson is the interim dean of our School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Gibbs Knotts. So let's give our Dean Knotts a round of applause.
Thank you, President Hsu. So thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited, and it's going to be me up on stage asking a few questions, but I'm also going to be joined by State Senator Marlon Kimpson. I think some of you guys know Senator Kimpson. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a Morehouse College graduate. He's a USC law graduate. He works for the high-powered law firm of Motley Rice. But he is passionate about the state of South Carolina and the people of South Carolina. He's a fighter for public education, for South Carolina workers, for the environment, for racial and gender diversity. So please join me in welcoming Senator Marlon Kimpson to the stage.
Thank you, Gibbs.
Absolutely, it's an honor to be here. So what we're going to do is I'll make some remarks and introduce Secretary Castro. We're going to put him right in the middle. This will be the hot seat. We'll ask him some questions for about 30 minutes, and then we've got two students, Allegra and Will, who will come around and give you guys a chance to ask questions for about the last 30 minutes or so, and then there'll be a chance to meet the Secretary and get pictures and selfies and all that kind of stuff. So without further ado, I want to say it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Secretary Julian Castro from the great state of Texas. He grew up in San Antonio. So Secretary Castro grew up in San Antonio. He was elected mayor. He served in the Obama administration as HUD secretary. And again, it's just such a pleasure to have you here at the College of Charleston.
Great to be here.
All right, Tessie, how are you doing there?
There you go.
All right, here comes the mic guy. We're good. He knows what he's doing.
It wouldn't be an event without the audio-visual. There it goes, there it goes.
Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So I want to ask you, education has been important in your life. I know you've talked about the role education's played. You went to Stanford, majored in politics and communication, or political communication, I think, went to Harvard Law School. And I, you know, as somebody who teaches in the political science department, we've got a lot of political science majors here, to ask you a little bit about kind of what the role education's played and how what you've studied has affected your career and your run for president.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you, Dean Gibbs and Senator Kimpson and all the students who are here, who are back for another school year. Y'all look to be in good spirits, yeah? It's just the beginning of the semester, that's probably why. Yeah, you know, I have a twin brother, Joaquin, and some of y'all may have seen my brother. He likes to go around telling people that the way to tell us apart is that I'm a minute uglier than he is. I'm actually a minute older. And we grew up with my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother had worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter. She was a Mexican immigrant and never finished elementary school. And then my mother, she raised my mom as a single parent, and my mother was able to graduate from high school and then go on to a small Catholic university there in San Antonio. And then my brother and I grew up in the public schools of San Antonio and were able to go on to college and law school. We went together because I can't get rid of Joaquin. But so, I mean, education played an absolutely fundamental role in my success. The education that we got played an absolutely fundamental role in my success. In fact, that was originally the reason that I started getting interested in going into politics in the first place. I grew up with a mom that had been part of the old Mexican-American civil rights movement, the Chicano movement. And you know, she was a hellraiser when she was young. She ran for city council when she was 23 years old with this slate called the Committee for Barrio Betterment. They all lost because very few women and very few people of color won back then, because it was at-large elections. There were no single-member districts, so you had to run citywide. But she was always dragging us to rallies and to speeches and 3-hour organizational meetings and so forth. And if you had asked me when I was a teenager, like at 16, did I ever think that I would go into politics, I would have said, like, hell no. You know, because I didn't see the value in it. And my mother had come from a third-party background, like as an outsider. And so I questioned whether doing all of that, going into politics, people who were in politics, whether that could be effective. But what got me interested in trying to make a difference through politics was that when I went away from my home community for the first time, when Joaquin and I went to Stanford, what I saw there in the Bay Area was a place that had much higher income levels, higher educational achievement levels, seemed more ready and prepared for the future. And I got a chip on my shoulder about the community that I had grown up in. And mostly wanting to make sure that more people from there could have the same kind of opportunity that Joaquin and I had had. So when I got back home and decided to run for city council and then became mayor, education was the thing that I absolutely focused on the most. Even though in San Antonio, we had 15 independent school districts. We didn't have one unified school district. We had 15 that operated in the bounds of the city. And there was no formal role for the mayor for the city. You know, those were all independent bureaucratic administrations with their own school boards and jurisdictional boundaries. But we did something called Cafe College, which was this one-stop center to provide financial aid and admissions advice in a one-on-one basis for students, no matter what school they went to, or you didn't have to pay anything, because we found that the ratio of counselors to students was 1 counselor to 420 students in our schools. And then we did something called Pre-K for SA, which was a sales tax initiative that went to the ballot to raise the sales tax by 1/8 of a cent to significantly extend high-quality full-day pre-K. Because education is so fundamental to a child's success, and the research is very compelling, that if you have $1 to spend on education, you're best to spend that dollar early. No offense to higher education, which is also very important, but you know, you need to make sure that people start off in a strong way. And so today, Pre-K for SA is a great program in San Antonio. And so I've always focused on education because I feel like I've been blessed having gotten a good education.
Thanks, Gibbs, and it's great to be with you, Secretary. First of all, let me just applaud this crowd. It's a Friday night, and we have so many students. And Secretary, I think that is indicative of turning Charleston blue. We are, Rob and Stuart, we're just one Senate seat away from flipping the Charleston delegation to a Democratic chairman, and I hope to be the Democratic chairman. Speaking of education, Secretary, I note that you're a Stanford graduate. You're also a graduate of Harvard Law School. And you've been pretty public about the role that affirmative action has played in not only your admissions, but your success matriculating through both of those schools. Here we are in 2019. Question to you, do you still think that there's a role for affirmative action?
That's a great question. Yeah, you know, people asked me a few years ago that I think that affirmative action may have played any role in getting into Stanford specifically, you know, when I went to college. And I said, yeah, that it's possible that it did, you know, because my SAT score at that time was a little bit lower than the median SAT score of folks matriculating there. And I said that if you're going to have programs like that in place, that you should be very honest, right? Like straightforward about that kind of stuff. And that I still do believe that there's a role to play for affirmative action that recognizes where people come from and the obstacles that they have to overcome. I also know there are other types of obstacles beyond race and ethnicity, right, that people have to overcome in life, and that admissions offices should take that into account. But it's true that today, as we've seen many times during the last 2 years of this administration, too oftentimes people are judged by the color of their skin, and that there are obstacles put in the way, and there's a legacy that has held back a lot of young people because of the schools that they would still go to. I mean, my brother and I, Joaquin and I, went to 2 school districts that were part of a landmark Supreme Court case called SAISD versus Rodriguez. For those of y'all who were lawyers or you've studied this, you'll know that this was a case in 1973 where the court took the complaints of parents, largely Mexican-American parents on the west side of San Antonio, who launched a lawsuit against the state because they said that the way schools were financed were unfair to property-poor school districts because they used a property tax to raise money to finance the schools, and those school districts were largely people of color, right? So we were essentially packed into neighborhoods and school districts that were very segregated, and still were able to overcome that, and you know, and to be able to do well enough to get into those universities. I think that our approach should still reflect that. I certainly don't believe that somebody should be let in just because of the color of their skin, but for folks that are competitive and they've overcome certain challenges, I think that you should still allow consideration for that. And also because there's a value in having a diverse set of people at the university. If you want a true learning experience, you know, folks need to be able to learn in an environment where they're able to appreciate the differences among us and prepare them for a world that is very diverse. I believe that that's especially true these days when we have, you know, too many voices that are trying to take us backward into a time that is more polarized. So that's, you know, that's how I see that issue.
Let me just point out, speaking of students, my niece is here. She's a freshman at the College of Charleston.
Where is she? Let's embarrass her. Let's embarrass her.
All right, absolutely. So, good to see you. So I want to ask about the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities. Trump's proposed eliminating these organizations. The Republican Study Committee talked about how the federal government really shouldn't be in the business of funding the arts. One report said that. And so what do you think of these programs, and what would you like to, what value do they play? Is there still a role for government support? And sort of how would you handle that as president?
we should love the arts, we should fund the arts, we should make the arts stronger. I see this on many different levels. Number one, you know, I've tried to be in the plans that I put forward as, and I use this word because we're in an academic setting, as intersectional as possible. I usually don't use that word on the but look, in my education plan, for instance, one of the things that I called for was greater funding for music and arts programs in our schools. Because as y'all know, when states around the country have looked for places to cut in the budget, right, as the budgets have gotten tighter and tighter, they have first looked to things like arts and music education, which is a shame because research is compelling that good arts and music education not only often gives, feeds the passion of a student, but also even students that don't end up becoming artists or musicians, it helps to round them out and even can make them better at math or other subjects that people wouldn't necessarily think. So there's a tremendous value there. I also see this as, and folks here in Charleston will appreciate this, the arts have tremendous economic value to our communities. I come from San Antonio, Texas. Hopefully some of y'all have been there, right? You know that like Charleston, yeah, the Riverwalk and the Alamo, but we also have a lot of beautiful murals up on the walls of churches and other buildings throughout the city, and we have a vibrant organic arts scene of local artists. That adds to tourism dollars for a city. Y'all know this here in Charleston, right? The entertainment industry in so many ways, right? So it makes business sense, it makes educational sense to fund the National Endowment for the Arts and humanities, and in every way to lift up the arts. When I was mayor of San Antonio, one of the things that we did was that we created a poet laureate for San Antonio, which had not been done before in a local community in Texas. There was a Texas poet laureate, but not one in the city. We did that. We worked a lot with the library and other organizations to lift up our arts and music, and I'm proud of that work. And if I'm elected president, I believe we need to go back to a time where we're appreciating those things, not targeting them.
Mr. Secretary, and you have a lot of experience with housing and urban development. We have Joe Watson here from the East Side neighborhood, which borders the College of Charleston. It's an area that is rapidly changing. The average price of a home in Charleston County is now approaching over $300,000, and we hadn't even gotten to the peninsula, which is higher. You've had a lot of experience with the Obama administration tackling the housing crisis. As we sit here today in 2019, if we look at the landscape all across the country, particularly in our urban areas, what is your plan to provide housing for people who work full-time but can't seem to afford to live close to their jobs because of the escalating home prices?
You're right. I mean, I bet y'all have seen the rents go up and up, right, over the last few years. And people often think of this problem as a problem just for like San Francisco and Boston and New York and Chicago, these big cities, but really it's everywhere. We have a rental affordability crisis in this country. So what happened, right, about a decade or so ago when we went through the housing crisis, a lot of people lost their homes. And our home ownership rate is still at one of its lowest levels in 40 years. On top of that, the supply of housing that's often being built, and y'all probably see this here in Charleston, is luxury apartments, luxury condos, right? Largely unaffordable to a lot of people. So I have a housing plan that I call my People First Housing Plan that calls for investing to create 3 million more units of housing that's affordable to the middle class, the working poor, and the poor over the next decade. And also to invest the resources to end homelessness in this country by 2028, which sounds ambitious, and it is, but you know, when you think about what was accomplished in the Obama administration, between 2010 and 2016, we reduced veteran homelessness by 47%. I mean, think about that. we cut veteran homelessness just about in half in 6 short years. Because everybody was working the way they should. Republicans and Democrats in Congress appropriated money for housing vouchers for veterans that needed a place to live. The administration, the president and the first lady led an effort called the Mayor's Challenge to end veteran homelessness, working with mayors and governors across the country. More than 800 mayors and governors signed up for that challenge to drive down the numbers on veteran homelessness. And we had a coordinated effort of 19 federal agencies, including HUD and the VA, that were leading the way to drive down veteran homelessness. You know, cut through the red tape, do everything that you could to just get those numbers down, right? And with that, we accomplished something big. That makes me believe that if we work together, if people are able to dedicate the resources and do the right policies, that we actually can drive down homelessness in this country. And that's part of my plan. The last thing I'll say is, I think of housing as a human right. I think of housing as everybody should have the same. And, I was just in Las Vegas the other day, and I visited with charities that were giving out clothing and food to people who were homeless. And a couple of months ago, I visited in Las Vegas storm drainage tunnels that run under the Strip. This one ran under the Hard Rock Hotel. It was very ironic to meet people who were living in a storm drainage tunnel in a city that is known for the glitz and the glamour of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of hotels that tower above that strip, and tourists who come from around the world and spend like crazy on gambling and shopping and shows, and all the while underneath them, people are living there with nothing. They said that there have been incidents where people have drowned because it started raining and they couldn't get out of the storm drainage tunnel in time before the water overtook them. I mean, that is a sad state of affairs. Right? But instead of just accepting that sadness, what we need to do is translate that into the political well to do something about it. And it's a shining example in the Obama administration. Some of that time I wasn't there, so I'm not trying to take all the credit for it by any means. There was a lot of people in DC and outside of DC working on it, but it showed that we can actually do something on housing and homelessness. And I want to bring that kind of passion and track record of getting things done if I'm president.
There's a lot of polarization. You've got your people camped out by the TV stations and where they get their news. You know, how would you try to be the president for all the people? I mean, what do you think you could do to maybe try to bring some folks back together?
I believe that that's not going to be an easy thing to do, but in one way it's going to be easy, because I think anybody who is the next president is going to be less divisive than this president. It's hard to get on the other side of Canada, right? But he's done that. Number one, it starts with a tone. Immediately on January 20th, 2021, yeah, by the way, I think on January 20th, 2021 at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, Democratic House, and Democratic I think that Jamie Harrison is going to beat Lindsey Graham. But the next president, he or she, is going to have an opportunity to try and bring people together again. And changing the tone immediately is the #1 priority. That's going to happen right away. Instead of spending all of our time getting on Twitter trying to insult people or put down other politicians or insult the island of Puerto Rico, for what? We're going to pay attention to what we have to do in the job to be effective and to reach a hand out across the aisle. Now, I have experience doing this. When I came up as a councilman and mayor, we ran in a nonpartisan environment, like a lot of local politicians have to. So I had to go and talk to people that were Republicans, that were conservatives. And my block walking list, for those of y'all that have volunteered, and now they're on, you can get them on your mobile phone. Yeah. But you go to a house, right? My block walking list used to include people that were Republican and Democrat. It wasn't cut up by whether somebody was Democrat or not. So I had a lot of experience listening to and trying to persuade and working with people that thought differently from me. And I think we need that. The other thing that we need is we need an attitude and actions that say everybody counts. Everybody counts in this country. So tried to integrate that into my campaign. The first stop that I made after I announced it was not to Iowa or New Hampshire, it was to San Juan, Puerto Rico, as the people there were hurting, to say, look, we're gonna have a country that is big enough to take care of everybody, all of our citizens here. And to our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico, we care about you, we know that you're hurting, you're still trying to recover. And I wanted to go over there and send that message loudly and clearly. I've also traveled to parts of each of these early states that people don't think of because they're not blue areas, right? And I'm going to continue to do that. But in the longer term, what we need to do is that we need to find a way to get rid of Citizens United so that you don't have as good. And you tamp down the influence of big special corporate interests and really rise up, lift up the voice of the people. Secondly, I support legislation that's already been taken up in Congress. I think it's H.R. 1, which would change the way that states do redistricting. Because we need a more independent, bipartisan, or commission style of redistricting so that you don't have extreme partisan gerrymandering. I've seen that in Texas. Folks have seen that probably here in South Carolina, right? There are about 15 states out there that have a more neutral form of redistricting. We need the people to choose their politicians, not the politicians to choose their people. That's the kind of thing that I would do. The last thing that we need to do is that we need to empower the people of this country vis-a-vis Congress and the executive branch. So one thing that I would do right away is that I would make Congress subject to the Freedom of Information Act. You know how if you want to go get your emails of a city council member or of a state representative probably, you usually can do that in a state. You can request those documents under the state's version of the Freedom of Information Act. Congress made itself exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. That means that the very body that gets lobbied the most by these big, powerful interests with a lot of money being thrown around the campaigns are the most opaque. You can't get their emails, you can't get their communication. Now, why the hell is that? That makes no sense whatsoever, and I would change that immediately if I'm president.
Senator Kinsey, you ask one more question.
Okay, sure.
I'm sure this crowd's got some questions for Secretary Castro.
Over 4 years ago, Secretary, we witnessed horrific shooting in church. The people were gathered together to pray and worship and learn the Bible. And of course, since then, we've had multiple mass shootings all across the country, as most recently as a shooting this month in North Charleston at a shopping mall. And of course, the over 30 lives lost between El Paso and Daytona. You've put forth a bold plan, people first, disarm hate. And as I understand the plan, and I haven't read the whole thing because it's pretty detailed, but you will make a concentrated effort on rooting out domestic terrorists, and you call these terrorists in your plan white supremacists. Question I really have, first I applaud you for recognizing that this is an issue. Many people just lump the category into whatever criminal law is on the books for murder. But you go further. Question, how do you reconcile people's First Right Amendment, freedom of speech to talk, to express ideas that they have, and then somehow single out those who are truly carrying out crimes of hate based on race?
And thank you for the question, Senator. You know, I know that Charleston unfortunately has a very direct experience with this from 2015 and what happened in the Mother Emanuel Church and the 9 lives that were lost there. Of course, a few weeks ago we saw what happened in El Paso. We've seen that this extremism, this ideology of white supremacy is on the rise, unfortunately. And what I proposed is what I call my disarm hate plan that has 2 components to give our Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and FBI the tools that they need and the resources to root out that extremism and to catch it before it turns into violence. And then also, common sense gun safety legislation. Right? We need universal background checks. Building the capacity of our regimes and making sure that guns don't get into the hands of the wrong people, right? So extreme risk protection orders, or what I know as red flag laws. I also call for a 7-day waiting period on the purchase of firearms, and I call for the imposition of a 10% or 20% excise tax on ammunition and guns. And with the $600 to $700 million that we would garner from that every year, we would invest in community programs to prevent gun violence, because we know that even though we see this in a mass shooting context, there's everyday gun violence in our communities that are taking lives, especially of young people out there. But you bring up a great question, which is, okay, on this first part, how do we do this in America? How do we do this and still recognize the First Amendment right that people have to express their opinion fully, even if those are noxious, awful opinions? It's not against the law to have an opinion that is racist or, anti-Semitic or sexist, right? And my answer to that is, I do think that if we give our law enforcement agencies, in partnership with our social media platforms and others, the tools that they need to make that distinction, I believe, and that we monitor that closely, because I don't ever want our government to be a tool of any certain leaders that want to suppress certain types of speech and go overboard. Right? We truly want to stop what's going to become violence, right? Identify people and separate them out, those who are going to commit an act versus those just speaking. But there are markers that people can look for, right? Acts that have been committed, people that call immediately for action, right? People that put videos on that say they're going to go commit an act, right? Or get to the brink of that. I think that there is that zone between speech and action that where our authorities should have the resources to step in and help prevent that speech from becoming all-out violence. I don't think that we want to suppress speech, but when it gets to that brink of action, and there's a track record of that, then I do think that our authorities should have what they need to stop that before it becomes what we saw in El Paso or what Charleston unfortunately saw at the Mother Emanuel AME Church. And everybody would be lying if we said that line is always easy to determine. It's not. And we have to absolutely respect our First Amendment rights. But I believe that we can do better than we're doing now, especially because this administration cut the budget of one of those agencies that's working on those things by 85%. I would restore that funding and then increase it.
So if you've got a question, raise your hand. Allegra Campbell, president of the Political Science Club over there. Allegra wave. And you've got William Neese, president of College Dems. So Allegra looks like she might identify somebody. William's going first? William? Okay, go.
Hi, Secretary Castro. Thank you for being here. My name's Trip Keefe. I'm curious, you touched on this a little bit, but you're from Texas. We're here in South Carolina, both traditionally considered red states. And you've been very successful, so I'm wondering, what's your advice for people who are Democrats that want to make a difference in a red state? How do they navigate that complexity?
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I can commiserate with you all coming from Texas. Although, as you'll see, Texas is getting closer and closer, flipping over. And my main piece of advice would be to keep going, because South Carolina is changing. I believe that Jamie Harrison can win next year. All right, but even if, let's say that he is not successful, I think he can be. It's still going to be closer, I bet, much closer than it has in a long time. And what I hear when I come here is there are people who used to be Republican that in the era of Trump have said, hey, you know what? That doesn't represent me and my family. Like, I'm not with that. I can't stand this man. He doesn't represent the values that I have. And I'm looking for a Democrat that I can support, right? So there are a lot of people out there looking. I think the role that you and others can play is energizing efforts to register people to vote, to carry the message of what Democrats stand for, that we are a bigger tent party these days. That's our obligation also, to be a bigger tent party, right? To be accepting of, you know, differences of opinion and so forth. And also to do the work of reaching people, to get them off the sidelines, who are often on the sidelines. Like, you know, I come from the Hispanic community. There's no community that's been more on the sidelines, in a sense, than the Hispanic community. The voting level of Hispanics in the United States is like 18 points lower than for African Americans and for whites. And so that is a lot of work that needs to be done. But it's only going to get done if people are willing to knock on those doors and meet people where they're at. And there's nothing glamorous about that. But it is the most effective thing that can be done. The other thing is, I hope that you know, a lot of the students here, that y'all consider going into politics. I went into politics when I was 26 years old. And there are a lot of people that go into politics at a young age. We need more people to go into politics at a young age with your energy and your vision and your idealism. And don't let people tell you that you have to wait your turn, right? Just go and do it. And I think you'll inspire other young people to get involved in the process if you do that.
How you doing? Oh, okay. I just wanted to say thank you for coming. And honestly, when I saw you walk in through those doors, it was like amazing to me. It made me think that you are a human being. But so earlier this week, candidate Beto came and he spoke to us. And the comment that I'm about to make is not intended to be disrespectful towards him. But what I noticed from his speech, that he came in and he was very passionate, and the way he set it up was he was very much attacking Donald Trump, which nothing is wrong with that. But from how I view it is that and what he's doing, he's like riling up fear or emotion in order to motivate the voter, which in this sense would be us. But at the same time, like Donald Trump himself, he used fear and emotions in order to get votes. So at the end of the day, I know this question is very vague, but what I'm asking is, how are you different from, I guess, Beto O'Rourke and this? They're not in the same category, but how are you different from Beto O'Rourke and Donald Trump?
Let me defend Congressman O'Rourke. He's very, very different, of course, from Donald Trump, and you know, and he's a fellow Texan that I think is articulating a lot of the frustration that a lot of people have with this president. And I have done that at certain times too, and I think that certainly he, coming directly from El Paso, has reflected the passion of a lot of what people feel. But let me just say that what I've tried to do in this campaign, right, just speaking for myself, is, I mean, I hope folks are noticing, you know, there was an article in Politico today, and the title of it was, you know, how Julian Castro got drowned out. Like, they're writing my obituary and nobody knows for like 5 months, right? But I feel like little by little, I've been charting my own path in this campaign. People have been watching. Very early on, deciding to go to Puerto Rico and saying, like, I'm not going to Iowa, I'm not going to New Hampshire. Like, I'm going to the people who need the attention right now and need a voice to say, we're there for you. Tackling this issue of immigration first, because this president thinks that that's how he's going to win, and not being afraid to say, you know what, like, I'm Latino, and some people are going to think that I'm just doing this because I'm a brown guy that's running. Why are you in the race if you're not going to stand up for people? You know, no matter what you do. Police reform. Tackling this issue of, you know, recognizing we have a lot of great police officers, but saying the names of people like Walter Scott and Raquan McDonald and Eric Garner and so many people, especially young black men, that have been mistreated by police, and these videos that we see all the time, and not being afraid to say that this system is broken and we have to fix it. And also charting my own course on, things that I think people didn't think we would address, like, we released a plan the other day on protecting animals and wildlife. Some folks were like, what are you talking about? Half my staff didn't think that I should release that plan, or didn't, not everything I released it, but they wondered, why are you focused on that? And I said, because I know that if we're gonna be a truly just people and a better country, that it is also about how we treat animals too, right? Along with human beings, of course. So I've tried to chart my own course in this campaign. Even today, I made a statement about what happened with the Iowa and Nevada caucus. They were going to allow for a virtual caucus so that more people could participate. The DNC made a decision today to say that they don't accept what Iowa has proposed, or Nevada has proposed. They have security concerns, which I said, I understand that. I don't want a process that could be hacked and influenced, but I pushed back and said, then y'all need to fix it. Figure out some way that people can vote absentee, because they estimated that maybe up to a third more people would be able to participate that way. And coming out of 2016, we know that there's this concern that more people get to participate, not less. So, I may win or I may lose this campaign, but I'm going to speak my mind, and I'm going to be my own person. And I'm also going to present a compelling, positive vision. I think this is what you're speaking to. Positive vision of what we can do. Look, there's going to be life after Donald Trump. Okay? There's going to be life after Donald Trump. In fact, we're going to tell him adios on the White House lawn on January 20th, 2021. And when we get to life after Donald Trump, we're going to get to, okay, but now what are you going to do? What do you stand for? And so I've laid out this vision of being smarter, being healthier, being fairer, and being more prosperous as a country for everybody. And I'm just going to stick to that. And I think that with hard work, that little by little more people are recognizing it and becoming supporters.
Hi, Julian. My name is Brandy Del Rio. I also hail from Texas, so anyway,
All right, which part of Texas?
oh my gosh, the butthole of Brownsville. But anyway, so I'm proud. It's true, guys. Anyway, so I am Latina también. Yeah, so I'm very proud about it. But you also mentioned at the beginning that you came from a family where your grandmother and your mother were major influences in your life early on, and still to this day. So, however, I didn't really hear anything much about women's rights, women's right to choose. I can't even speak right now. And you hailing from a red state, it's a state that's really attacking a woman's right to choose. So I wonder, where do you lie on that spectrum? What would you do when you got into office?
Thank you very much for the question. Good to see fellow Texans. Yeah, I've been very outspoken, but I believe that we need to protect Roe versus Wade, and a woman's right to have an abortion if she chooses to do that. I also mentioned in the first debate, that we need to stand up not only for reproductive rights, but reproductive justice, to ensure that no matter who you are, that you have access to reproductive health care, to birth control, to abortion if that's what you choose. And also that we recognize, right, that in our country, if you're poor, or if you're a woman of color, or if you're in the trans community, right, that oftentimes the barriers to get reproductive health care are that much higher. And we need to work to end that. Those are the kinds of things that I would like to work on if I'm president, and make sure that we appoint people to the federal bench that understand the importance of Roe versus Wade and are going to stand up against this all-out assault that's happening in states like Georgia and Missouri and Alabama and my home state of Texas. I was a big fan of what Wendy Davis did a few years ago with her filibuster. So I will absolutely work to protect that right.
afternoon, Secretary Castro. My name is Nina Cano, and I'm an immigration attorney here in Charleston. My question has to do with immigration. I'm wondering what immediate steps you're going to take to remedy the reckless disregard for immigration policy and law in our country. We've seen everything from revoking prosecutorial discretion to unilaterally changing asylum law to the separation of families. And I'm wondering what your immediate steps will be within 100 days to repair all the damage that has been done.
Thank you for that question. Nina, the list is very, very long, but let me just start off by saying that I believe that we should use common sense and compassion instead of cruelty toward migrants and toward immigrants who are here living undocumented in America. So the question specifically is, what would I do immediately when I'm elected president? A number of things. I would end that dumb Muslim travel ban. I would end what's known as the migrant protection protocols or the Remain in Mexico policy. I'm beginning with what are the executive actions that this president has taken. I would also end family separation or zero tolerance. You know, that has sputtered recently, but there's still instances where that's being used. I would also reverse decisions that this administration has made not to provide, for instance, the flu vaccine to migrant families. They also are ending a program to keep immigrants who have an urgent medical need here. Y'all may have seen this news in the last couple of days. Basically, the administration is using these folks as a punching bag to be as cruel as they can to them, hoping that that's going to win them votes among some folks, that this is red meat to their base. And it is immoral, it is wrong. Those are some of the things I would immediately do. In addition to that, I believe that one of the lessons that we can learn from the 93, 94, and then 2009, 2010 timeframe, when you have a Democratic majority, is that you have to move on issues like this. And so I would immediately put forth immigration reform legislation to Congress to fix our broken immigration system. And look, I think all of us know that ultimately you've got to negotiate, right? I have set a standard of what I believe we need to do on immigration that's over here. I know that in the give and take of legislation, you're going to have to negotiate. That's what legislation is all about. But we need to do it. And we were almost there in 2013. If it had gotten a vote on the House floor, it would have passed, but John Boehner did not allow the House to vote. I'm confident that if we have a Democratic majority, that we can get a vote, that we will jump over a filibuster to get it done, and we can make sure that people are treated humanely in this country instead of cruelly.
We all know that 45 has done a horrible job to Americans, all amongst us in terms of races, sexes, income, and ethnic groups. And we're facing a great election in 2020. But the rest of this world does not have that opportunity to participate. What will you be willing to do as our president to reunite this country into a holistic world, a gentle world, a peaceful world, and not one that has been torn asunder by a reckless polemicist that we've had for the last 3 years? What will we do to restore America to a place of honor and contribution to the world society?
Well, I would start off on the afternoon of January 20th of 2021 with my first executive order to recommit to the Paris Climate Accord. So that we immediately send the signal to the world that the United States is back as a leader on important issues for our global community. And then follow that up by repairing the damage that's been done with our allies in Europe and other places, and showing respect to our neighbors of Canada and Mexico, and making it clear that we're going to lead on issues of human rights, whether it's the treatment of women as we exit out of Afghanistan, or in places like Saudi Arabia, or in human rights abuses in countries like China. that instead of cozying up to dictators, the United States is going to stand for people around the world being able to live with dignity and with freedom and able to fulfill their potential. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to make the mistakes of the past of getting into unnecessary wars and spending trillions of dollars doing it. But it does mean that we're going to stand up to those who would take our world in a different direction. And I believe that that starts here at home. We're going to treat people with respect and compassion here at home as well. And make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable at home. Because, we can't talk. We can't talk the talk if we're not willing to walk the walk. We need to walk the walk here at home before we lecture other countries about what they're going to do in their own country. And the administration has been failing on both counts. Failing here at home and then failing to set an example and to speak to these issues around the world. Mechanically, let me just give you something practical also that I would do. I would restore the strength of our diplomatic corps and our Peace Corps and USAID. Peace Corps and USAID and our diplomatic corps, these are engines of peace. Our diplomatic efforts to avert conflict or to manage it or bring it to a resolution where it exists. The president has allowed ambassadorships and sub-ambassadorship positions to go completely unfilled. Also, they're having a harder time recruiting people to the diplomatic corps. Why wouldn't they? Because people don't believe that this administration really values the mission of the State Department. I want to rebuild that State Department up with the next generation of great folks who are going to go and help avoid conflict and manage and resolve conflict where it exists, and thereby make a contribution to the peace of this world in the years to come.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Allegra, you've got one over there.
Good evening, Secretary Castro. Thank you so much for being here. I was wondering, as you remember, during the Obama administration, marriage equality became the law of the land. For many, this was seen as the sort of crowning jewel for the LGBT rights movement. However, housing discrimination and workplace discrimination still are major problems for the LGBT community, particularly the trans community. I was wondering, how would you address this as president?
I appreciate that question. And I remember that day in 2015 when the Supreme Court handed down its opinion and how much joy there was, and hopefulness and also relief. And in many ways people thought that was the pinnacle and that we could never go backward. But as you know, there was still discrimination that exists in housing and employment in so many other different ways, and this administration has been going backward on these issues. So when I was mayor of San Antonio, one of the things that we did was that we passed a groundbreaking non-discrimination ordinance that included the entire LGBTQ community. Some folks wanted us to leave out the transgender community because they thought that it might be more politically feasible in Texas to do it without that community. We said, no, we're going to include everybody, and we passed it that way. When I went to HUD, we expanded something called the Equal Access Order that protects the LGBT, well, at that time, it did not fully include the transgender community. Under my administration, we included the transgender community with the transgender rule, so that if you're transgender and you're trying to avail yourself, for instance, of accommodations at a publicly funded shelter, federally funded shelter, they have to accommodate you according to how you're comfortable and to your identity, so people can feel safe and be safe. And as president, I would support legislation like the Equality Act, which would root out discrimination and enforce non-discrimination in the housing and employment context. We need to do that, and I will make sure that I push that in Congress.
Hi, my name is Marley Jones. I'm a student here at the College of Charleston. And while I recognize that mental health may not be a top priority, but as someone who has suffered from mental health issues and as someone who has seen the effect of teenage suicide in schools, I was wondering what you will do to help promote the awareness and promote action for mental health in America.
Thank you. Thanks for the question and for sharing that. You know, in just about every stump speech I give, obviously today we didn't do a stump speech, but in just about every stump speech I give, one of the things I say is that as we improve our healthcare system, that we need to end this distinction between physical healthcare and mental healthcare and invest in mental healthcare so that everybody lives with strong mental healthcare. Because I know in so many ways, too many people still suffer in stigma, right? That they don't get the treatment they need because there's still a stigma involved, or they're not covered, they can't get the treatment, or also, as y'all know, especially in a lot of rural communities, there's no good quality mental health care available. You go to a lot of these rural hospitals, medical facilities, a lot of them is closed down, their inpatient psychiatric care, or their psychiatric, or their mental health units completely. People have to travel farther and farther. Here, I bet in South Carolina, certainly in Iowa, even in my home state of Texas. So we need to provide the resources for all communities to be able to have good quality mental health care. And, you know, we should connect the dots here for a second, right? Now, I think that the Republicans have used the issue of mental health to distract attention from addressing the fact that guns are a problem in this country. However, so I'm not talking about this in that context. What I am saying is, though, that we also know that more than half of the deaths by gun are deaths by suicide. And there are people that have depression, or perhaps bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, or something where they're not able to get the treatment that they should be getting and the medication that they should be getting. I want to make sure that they can get it, and they do get it, so that they don't get to the point of feeling overwhelmed and harming themselves. And that if we connect the dots of doing that, of making those investments, we also will reduce gun deaths in this country. And so for so many different reasons, that makes sense for us to do. And like I said, I mean, at every stop, I have been talking about that, and I'll continue to talk about it. And if I'm elected president, I'll do something about it. All right? Thank you very much.
Someone asked over and waiting to come back up. They've got some a shirt for Senator Kempson and Secretary Castro to remember us by. Support the colors. Thank you very much for being here. That was super informative. We really appreciate it. That's better.
On behalf of College of Charleston, we want to thank you for both being part of our Bully Pulpit Series, and we look forward to both of you being back in Charleston soon. Thank you so much.